Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, a 10-time Emmy Award winning producer and director in the sports world, along with being the author of 321 We're on the Air, Robert Steinfeld. Robert, thanks so much for coming on, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to speaking to someone who shares the same philosophy I do, is go out and get it.
Yes, I do share that philosophy. A lot of my viewers know a lot of the content I make. I'm very passionate about my sports teams. I'm very passionate about my work as well. So I'm so glad that we're able to speak because you've had such a great career in this industry. Before we break down all the great things you've done and obviously your book, when did you realize this was even something you wanted to pursue? Because you mentioned it was something you wanted to do at a young age. When exactly was that light bulb moment where you realized this would be a great career path? And what has been your career path since to get to the point where you're at now?
Yeah, well, I knew back like in fourth grade that I wanted to be in the television business. And so I started, you know, doing it. I started going down to Channel 8 in Dallas, the local ABC affiliate, and I would visit Vern Lundquist, who was then a local Dallas sports anchor. And also he did the Cowboys radio. And I would go down to the studio and watch him prepare. I would take the Dallas City bus down. My parents actually let me go down, and I would sit in the studio, watch him prepare, and then I would go in the studio and watch him anchor the sports. 15 years later, I end up producing college basketball for USA Network, Southwest Conference basketball, then during the Phi Slamma Jamma era with the Houston Cougars. And I hired Vern to do one of his first play-by-play assignments on a weekly basketball package. And when you look at my book too, you'll notice there's stories about working with Vern, and also he wrote a really nice testimonial that's on the back cover and also inside the book. So then I went to high school and I was on the journalism staff on one of the greatest high school newspapers in the country, the Hillcrest Hurricane in Dallas. My best teacher I ever had was my high school journalism teacher, who I put in the book a few times about her and what she taught me. And one of those was, when you write the lead, which is the first paragraph of a story, read it back to yourself. And if you say, so what, at the end of the paragraph, then you need to rewrite it and make it more compelling. And I do that even to this day. I think when I write stuff, about her. And, by the time I got to the University of Texas, I was already on the Daily Texan news staff, newspaper staff, before I even started classes. And my first assignment was covering the University of Texas football team scrimmage. And I thought that was cool. And I still have the first article I wrote in the Daily Texan, and it's Earl Campbell scored 3 touchdowns, aided in 3 more when he was a freshman, eventually winning the Heisman Trophy at Texas. We were freshmen the same time at the University of Texas, so that was pretty cool. And I got permission from the University of Texas media to reprint that story, and also a column that I wrote about why baseball wasn't being televised nationally on television. Ironically, about 10 or 15 years later, I end up producing the Sunday night college baseball game of the week on ESPN,
Right.
and then producing the College World Series for many years. So I don't think some of that stuff is just by chance. You kind of set a destination and a path for yourself.
Right.
And one of the lessons I put in the book is about, pursuing your passion and, blazing your own trail like you're doing.
Thank you so much. And you did blaze your own trail, as you just mentioned. And you already mentioned just a few great moments of your career, and we're going to get into many more. You'd mentioned that in your book, 321, we're on the air. It's your new book. It was just finally kind of published a few weeks ago. I was able to get an early copy, which I really appreciated that. And I've read the book, and it's just the stories you share in there are really incredible. You mentioned Vern Lundquist, how he has a saying on the back. He says, I know you will enjoy reading his stories and listening to his advice, and I 100% did. What inspired you to write the story about some of your best career moments? And what makes it a great read for a listener who may want to purchase and learn about those interesting stories?
Yeah, I mean, why? Who knows me? People in the industry do and everything. And really, the reason I wrote the book was during COVID, when there was no sports to produce and there was no sports to watch, even as a fan, which I am. My wife looked at me one night and she said, you're really starting to get in my hair. Why don't you go write a book or something? So I did. And I did journal some of these stories throughout my career. And I've been in the business, for 5 decades, working for various networks. And, when a major thing or a major event happened, I did journal it so that I would have it accurate later on if I wanted to relive it. And I wasn't sure if I was ever going to write a book one day, but it's always good to document certain aspects. And just like when I was writing for the Texan, the Hillcrest Hurricane, and the Dallas Times Herald, I kept a string book, which is, a scrapbook of your stories, not only so I could refer back to them, but if you're trying to get another job in the print or your journalism industry, you have something to show them. Now,
Right.
of course, you can do it all digitally, but back then, it helped me get a job right away with the Daily Texan, and then it got me a job on the spot with the Dallas Times Herald in Dallas, a major metropolitan newspaper that was at the time as equally as big as the Dallas Morning News. I actually had a job offer, which I accepted, to go to Abilene to write sports while I was trying to land a full-time broadcasting job in production. And on the day that my car was packed and I was ready to leave Dallas, I was trying so hard over a 10-day period to get a job in Dallas. I didn't have to leave Dallas market and go to Abilene. Nothing against Abilene, but if I could stay in Dallas, that would be better.
Right.
But I was new, and everyone says you need to go out into the small cities and get the job. It's hard to get a job in a major city. So like I said, I had my car packed, and if I didn't get the job, I had an interview with the Dallas Times Herald on the day I was leaving. I actually found it the day before. I called them up and said, you got to get me an interview. I'll come in this afternoon or tomorrow first thing in the morning. But if I don't get the job, I'm leaving to Abilene. So I go in, I have my string book, and I basically pleaded with them. But they loved the fact that I had, experience with the Daily Texan and others. And they hired me on the spot. And what a relief that was. So I'm staying in Dallas, and I call my friend up who took me out to dinner the night before as a kind of going away deal. And I thought he'd be really excited. And when I told him I'd gotten the job, the first thing he said to me, well, that's great, but you owe me dinner. So, yes,
That's what
because I
friends are
wasn't
for.
leaving.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
That's amazing, and you just all these great stories. Obviously, you mentioned you've been working in the business for 5 decades. A lot of these great stories, I felt like I was in the story. I feel like I know a lot of these personalized events, some of the biggest events in sports, because of the way that you made us capture that moment. You made the readers capture that moment. I personally
thanks.
really enjoyed reading the book and learning about all the great things that happened during your career. You came up with many creative ideas, and you still do, and you address that in the book. The one that really stood out to me was telling Alex Rodriguez that he should let Cal Ripken play shortstop for an inning during his final All-Star game, which he ended up doing. It turned out to be a historic All-Star game moment, one of the biggest in history between the two greats. As a producer, explain the importance of coming up with creative ideas like that to make a broadcast, and in this case, a sport and a game, come to life.
Right. And I wasn't producing the All-Star game. I was actually interviewing Alex Rodriguez to talk about Cal on the Thursday before the All-Star game, which took place on Tuesday in 2001 at Safeco Field in Seattle. But I was in Texas interviewing A-Rod, and I wanted a few other people that idolized Cal, because I was producing the Cal Ripken World Series, which is the Babe Ruth League equivalent of the Little League World Series. And so I was interviewing A-Rod, and right when I asked him about Cal and how he idolized him, a light bulb went off in my head. And I just thought, it would be a great idea. What if you change positions with Cal, let him play shortstop, because that's where he started all, the last 18 years, whatever it was. And then you go back to third base, which is where you played, and I think everyone think that'd be a great gesture. You letting your idols play at shortstop in the year he's retiring. And he goes, well, yeah, it might be a good idea. And I go, well, yeah, but he won't do it. He won't move over. But if you tell Joe Torre, the manager in the American League team, then he'll have to do it, because he's a baseball purist. His dad was a coach. If the manager tells you to do it, then he'll have to go and do it. So this was on a Thursday, and the All-Star game was on Tuesday. And basically, I only told 3 people. I told my wife, my best friend, and the media relations director for Fox Sports. And that was on Thursday. The All-Star game was Tuesday. I was eating dinner at home, and I turned on the game, and Joe Buck and Tim McCarver were doing the game. And all of a sudden, Joe Buck says, Alex Rodriguez had this great idea. And it wasn't his idea. It was my idea. And he goes, he thought Cal in his last year should start at shortstop, and he'll switch over to third base. Now let's see whether Cal will do it. Okay. So what I said, remember, is that he wouldn't do it. So now A-Rod's talking to Cal, and Cal doesn't want to go over there. But then A-Rod points over to the American League dugout, and Joe Torre's going, move over. So now he's got to move over, and he does. And Tim McCarver goes, well, if your manager tells you to do it, you got to do it. It's like everything that I predicted was going to happen. So now the media relations director for Fox calls my house, and he's going bonkers. He's going, I can't believe it. It's actually happening. You predicted the future. This is like an out-of-body experience. I can't believe it. And it's like, yeah. So, and then Jeannie Zalasko was a reporter. In the 7th inning, she interviews Joe Torre in the dugout, and she asks Joe, how'd that come about? And Joe goes, well, last Thursday at about 4:00, I got a call from Alex Rodriguez. Well, I interviewed him at 3:00, 4:00 Eastern time. So right after we got done with the interview, he called up Joe Torre and said he had this great idea. Well, I wasn't just going to let it sit. When he came back to Dallas, I hit him up in the clubhouse, and I had a picture of him pushing Cal over, 2 pictures, one for him and one for me. And because he said he wanted a picture of that when I was interviewing him earlier. So if I don't know why he said it, but I gave it to him. And then I had him sign the one to me, and it says, great idea, ! Bob, Alex Rodriguez. So I actually have a signed picture with him admitting that I did it.
It's awesome.
And little did Cal Ripken know that when I saw Cal a week later, I didn't tell him that was my idea, but he also signed the picture because he didn't realize it was great idea, Bob. He just thought it was like personalized to me. Great idea, Bob. It's like, so I've got the picture signed by both Cal and A-Rod. And then I contacted Rawlings, and I asked them if they had any like 2001 All-Star game balls. And they go, well, we have one left, or whatever they said. And they sent it to me. And I brought it to Cal, and Cal signed it for me. And he was MVP of that game. So awesome. I put that with the pictures and a story about that moment at home. And I wrote about it in the book. And with more detail, you can read about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that chapter. It kind of just made me light up because going into that, of course, I'm actually a huge Baltimore Orioles and Cal Ripken fan. So
Yeah.
going into that, I'm like, of course, you know about this moment. And then when I learned about you were the one who suggested it, that was obviously incredible. And just getting to kind of hear how that whole thing went down is incredible. And I love the whole story about getting an autograph and things like that. Like sometimes, even when you're at such a high level in this profession, you got to be a fan at times too, which is what I love. And I love this. I love this whole story. And it's just I got to ask you because you mentioned this without maybe this book being published. You mentioned not a lot of people knew, very little people knew that this was actually your idea to begin with. Do you, as a producer, right? You're behind the camera. You're not getting a lot of times all the credit for the great work that is going on during the broadcast. Has that ever upset you? And how do you kind of handle the fact that you're so successful and that maybe your name is not the first one that's coming up as great as you are? Has that ever been something that has affected you? And if so, how have you kind of dealt with that and still just like taken, I guess, to your heart these ideas, whether people know it was from you or not?
If that's why you're in the business, then that's going to fade quick. If you need like your ego and your name being I'm behind the camera. That's what I do. I want the talent that I work with to look good, right? If I get shared accolades, that great. You get Emmy Awards later on, but you know, I don't want to like come across, and I put this in the book with that idea for the Cal A-Rod switch. I don't want it to come across, it wasn't A-Rod's idea, it was my idea. I mean, that's the way we're framing it now, but I prefer it being framed that anyone can have a good idea, right? Or an idea. But if you don't act on it, I'm trying to tell people and teach, if you come up with an idea or something, suggest it in any business at any level, because people want to hear your input, and you may think it's a good idea. Somebody else may think it's a great idea. And not all ideas are great and not all ideas can be implemented. But if you give it a shot, it could turn out to be ranked along with Cal hitting the home run in his first at bat in that game, listed as one of the top 10 moments in All-Star game history.
It's awesome. And you kind of mentioned being behind the camera and having that kind of success. I've spoken with someone else who has done that, another award-winning producer, an Emmy award-winning producer, in Roger Goodman. Had the pleasure of having him on my podcast, and he gave me terrific tips, kind of off the camera, of ways to kind of excel, I guess you could say, during an interview. As a producer, how important is it to be able to wear so many different hats and have this kind of expertise in so many different areas?
I think that makes you more valuable, that you can do a bunch of different sports. But that what's really key is to learn other positions, learn what other people do in your business and how it's accomplished. Like everyone has a little different path to get to be a producer or a director. But along the way, I started out as a gopher, with ABC Sports, go for this, go for that, a runner. And you learn from osmosis a lot. And then you get a chance to work your way up, doing graphics, doing videotape, doing editing, doing copy. For me, fortunately, that I have a strong journalism background that's helped me with writing scripts and writing copy for the announcer. And I have a good eye for composition, for graphics, and that's because I did a lot of graphic work, starting out in my career, character generator and manual graphics, and and my newspaper background was good because I learned composition and laying out sections, writing headlines, where to put pictures, how to frame them, and that kind of stuff. So that helps you. So you may not, if you're trying to get your foot in the door in this industry, get your foot in the door in the industry. Go find a company you want to work for, or a production company, or whatever. And even if you want to be talent, and you can only get a job in production, do that. Because if you're going to be a talent, the more you know about, working the camera, audio, lighting, and everything, that's going to make you better on air if you understand the significance of that and how it all works.
Yes, it will. And I think kind of being versatile in an industry like this, whether you are a reporter or a producer or a writer, a lot of times you have to do it all. And I think that's one of the key things that I'm trying to do here at 13 years old is yes, I love reporting. Yes, I love these interviews, but there's also the writing component to this. There's a researching component. There's a producing component. There's an editing component. If you could kind of get together all those things, companies will want to hire people that are more versatile. So they don't need to hire more people to do a very similar job and complete a very similar task. And so I think being versatile and your ability to be versatile has allowed you to have so much success, allowed you to win 10 Emmy Awards. And what find so great about you is you've kind of been all over the place with so many different companies, but in the best way possible. I mean, you've worked in so many different sports with many different personalities and in many different cultures. How does your producing and directing style, and I guess you could say approach as well, change when you're working with different people at different places and even working with different sports?
Um, I think there's a main fundamentals in all sports you do. You have to be prepared, you have to be organized, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. It doesn't matter which sports at what level I'm doing. I approach them basically the same. I give all my all. I research, I want storylines, I want to know how we can make a telecast a show. I don't want to just produce a telecast, I want to produce a show. And that entails choreographing some, just so you know where you might go. But then you have to be keen, have a keen eye, and be cognizant of what's going on with the storylines and the show at that point, being able to react and being prepared. I mean, one thing I wrote about in the book again is like, you don't want to have, you can have a bunch of stories that you want to get across in a telecast. And I tell this to my announcers all the time. But if you use everything that you have, that means you're way too much. You're not actually watching the show, the telecast of storylines. You feel compelled to get rid of all of your research work. And what you really should do is be prepared for a lot of different situations, but just use like a doctor would, just the prescriptions that you need now. A doctor has a lot of instruments that they could use. They don't use all of them. They bring a lot of them if they're going out, but they're only going to use the ones they feel is necessary, and they don't empty the bag. So that's what I try to use an analogy with the talent. Be prepared, but only use what is needed.
I've spoken with many different play-by-play announcers, Ian Eagle, one of which, and we're kind of talking about how much preparation you do use. He says only 10 to 15%. And you don't want to really fill in a broadcast too much, and you kind of do want to make it a well-moving show. But if you don't have that extra research, if you don't have that 85% research that you don't use, you may not actually find yourself having as much success. It's always great to have in your back pocket. And I think just the process of making a broadcast come to life and learning about it for me on multiple different ends has been incredible. I want to get into some of the great things that you actually did in your career. You did a lot of work for the San Antonio Spurs, and you had an entire chapter on it in this incredible book that we have been referencing throughout this entire episode. You worked there for 4 of their 5 championships and won 5 titles in 25 years, one of the greatest dynasties in history. And not only did they do it, but it wasn't like the Kobe and Shaq Lakers, which was a quick run. They were able to have a stable and consistent team with good management and good coaching. We really haven't seen it at all, and having that much consistency in the NBA in such a great league like the NBA. What about that Spurs team, its players, its coaching staff, and its culture allowed them to have so much success?
Well, you named the key factors. I mean, it was consistent with Greg Popovich there, and he had some great assistant coaches. They drafted really well. I started out with the Spurs in '89, and fortunately, when I was there, David Robinson's rookie season, and then then we have Sean Elliott, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Avery Johnson. So there was a lot of great players that came through the Spurs system while I was there, and they were all good team players, and it was good culture. We also had Dennis Rodman for a little bit. So there were some interesting stories with
Yeah,
him in
yeah.
my book you can read about. But, and also, when you're working for the Spurs, it's good to, be part of the culture, like you said. And, if you adhere to that, you'll remain with the team. And, there were some rules like you don't really want, don't really talk to the players, unless they, you're passing them on the plane or on the bus, or you're going out to dinner and you see them or whatever. I see them in the hotel lobby, but you really, bother them much. So one time I was actually flying up to Toronto. We were playing the Raptors, and I get there at about 12 o'clock to the arena in Toronto, then Air Canada Center. And the team was still doing their shoot around, which for those that don't know, it's like a 45-minute to an hour of scouting, little walkthrough about 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning on the day of the game, and then the team goes back to the hotel. So I went out to the court because I was there an hour before the production truck was opening, and the Spurs were still at the shoot around, so I sat off the side, and the practice was ending, and I remember Tim Duncan hadn't been feeling well the day before, but he starts walking over towards me, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, am I going to say anything to him? Or I go, what's he doing? And I look to my right, and there's warm-up clothes right in the chair next to me, and it was his clothes. So he comes over and starts looking at me, and our eyes meet. So I said, okay, what the hell? I go, Tim, how are you feeling? And he goes, oh, I'm okay. I'm going to play tonight. And then he looks at me and says, how are you? And I'm thinking, he's actually asking me how I am. That's pretty cool. And I said, Tim, I feel great. I scored 21 points in the JBA yesterday, Jewish Basketball Association. And then he looks at me and says, got to dominate where you can, man.
I love that. That was one of the best stories I loved from your book. I love that. That's just awesome.
Yeah. So it's like that with the Spurs. Like, if you get to know the players a little bit and people, they all have a good personality. San Antonio was a perfect destination for Tim Duncan, and David Robinson was a perfect model for him, as far as integrity goes and athletic ability. So
to have that kind of duo, and then you even added on kind of toward those years. You obviously had Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, but then you even add on toward the end Kawhi Leonard, who won Finals MVP in 2014. I know you weren't there for that run, but it's just like that team just did such a good job, and they had a stretch. I think it was from like 2019 to 1994 where they didn't miss the postseason. It was like a 25-year streak, and
yeah,
for them to be able to do something like that, it just shows how consistent, how great of a franchise they are, and they continue to do great things. You're rebuilding that franchise currently with Victor Wembanyama, and you know that the Spurs will have that team back to being a contender in a few years. Look, you've announced many different, or not announced, excuse me, you've produced for many different teams, many different leagues, many different sports. One of the things you currently do, you're a producer for the Dallas Wings of the WNBA, and this was one of the, I think, biggest and most monumental seasons in WNBA history. Obviously, the additions of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, bringing in a whole fan base from women's college basketball, which had an all-time best success rate, especially in viewership in the NCAA tournament. How is the overall popularity of women's sports and women's basketball creating a new culture in Dallas and just across the NBA? WNBA.
it's really, yeah, WNBA. It's really jumped leaps and bounds in the last few years. Last year, actually. The Wings and just about every team set all kinds of attendance records, television ratings way up, a new NBA, WNBA contract, and a lot of interest. And, the NCAA tournament last year was, a big reason, with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese coming into the league. And, it's going to continue this year, with Paige Beckers, the prohibitive favorite to be the number one draft choice this year. So we've had a lot of big increase in viewership and interest. Our attendance has gone way up. for every game. And, a lot of my friends that had not watched women's basketball games in years wanted to watch and see how Caitlin Clark is playing. And they go, yeah, I hear it's fun to watch. They text me or call me. Yeah, this is great. I'm watching the game right now. I've noticed that they say that, the women's basketball is really fun to watch. And it's like, if you watch the WNBA playoffs this year, it's some of the best basketball playoffs that I've watched. It's like the games have gone down to the last second in regulation and in overtime, and great shots, great emotion. So I'm privileged to be executive producer of one of 13 WNBA teams.
Yes, you are, and I think it's great to see the popularity grow. I do think you're right, like me included. After watching that NCAA tournament and seeing all the success it had, and watching Caitlin Clark at Iowa and the undefeated South Carolina Gamecocks, and that crazy game between Iowa and UConn in the Final Four, which came down to the final seconds, it did bring a lot of viewers, including myself, to watching the WNBA, following its stars and following its great players. And you've been a huge advocate for women's sports in general. I mean, in the title of your book, it says, 3, 2, 1, we're on the air, but also an inside look at sports, television, journalism, and gender equity. You've been a huge advocate for women's sports, and you've been around the league since the inaugural season of the league back in 1997. So how has the game and its fans kind of changed along the way throughout this 30-year journey, near 30-year journey?
Yeah. Well, it was a new league, new teams. You know what it's like when teams are just getting together and trying to form a culture and getting used to the players. And and I've noticed, over the last 27 years or so that, the coaching is even better now. The players, at times you could say are more athletic, but I think a lot of it is that women's basketball is developed on the grassroots level, and there's a lot of girls and women now that are playing, and they've watched some of the trailblazers like Nancy Lieberman and Ann Myers Drysdale, Cheryl Miller, and others, and now girls are watching Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. They want to be them, they want to see them, and so it's great. It's great to be a part of it and watch the games. I'm a fan myself. I want to watch Caitlin Clark play. I had the honor, I would say, to produce 4 of her games this year, and pretty much each time she set some sort of record. She did. She had 19 assists in a game in Dallas. Then on September 15th, I was up in Indianapolis, and we were doing our game against the Wings there. Unbelievable atmosphere there. And she set a career high, 35 points that day, actually. So, it's fun watching her play, watching Enrique Ogunbowale play for the Dallas Wings and our other players. And just about every team comes in with someone exciting to watch. Nafisa Collier, Brianna Stewart, and Sabrina Ionescu. There's a lot of great players to watch.
Yes, there are. The league has just become so popular and so great, and it will continue to expand and continue to grow its popularity. And obviously, I think the NBA has done a lot to try to get a lot of viewers toward those summer months when the NBA isn't on for the WNBA. But it's just been a lot of fun to view those games. And obviously, you mentioned being a part of Caitlin Clark's historic games. Obviously, being a part of her career high 35-point game on September 15th, I'm sure does stand out to you. Look, Robert, this has been awesome. And learning about all these great stories. You've had such an incredible career. 10 Sports Emmy Awards. I wonder how many people have done that. I don't have the stat for it, but all I'm going to say is I'm sure that's pretty good. I'm sure that's up there for some of the most ever. And I know you've just done so many incredible things in this industry. Obviously, your book you just wrote, and I loved hearing about all these great stories and all these great experiences. I always ask one question to end every interview that I ever have had. If you had to give one piece of advice to an aspiring producer or director or author listening to this right now, if you had to give one piece of advice to someone who would love to be like Robert Steinfeld one day, what would it be and why?
Put your all into every telecast. Put all your passion, research, and effort. It doesn't matter what level of show you're working on. Give it your best shot, because there's always somebody that wants your job, because it's such a fun job to do.
Yes, it is. And this industry as a whole is just so competitive because a lot of people want to do it. Personally, I'm someone who
True.
wants to get into this industry as well.
Well, just keep doing what you're doing, and you never know. Well, make it happen for yourself. It looks like you've already starting to do that, which is very impressive. It's like I say, don't wait for somebody to give you the job. Go out and do it. Go find your own. If you don't have a team, you don't have a radio station or TV station in your area, go to a high school and call play-by-play on a game and record it. Or go out and shoot with your camera if you want to be a camera person, or just shoot some footage and then go out and edit so you can know how to edit. Don't wait. If you want to do it, pursue it now.
Yeah, this time is to do it. Now there's so many great resources to do this like we were doing right here. Robert Steinfeld, thank you so much for coming on, speaking about your best career moments and your new book, 321. We are on the air. For all my viewers, all my great viewers, please be sure to check out this book. A lot of great moments, a lot of really interesting things. And if you found the things that Robert said today very interesting, you'll learn even more about a lot of those stories about Dennis Rodman on the San Antonio Spurs, more about kind of the backstory to that iconic All-Star game moment between Cal and Alex Rodriguez, and so much more, all right here on 321. We are on the air. Robert Steinfeld, thank you so much.
And remember, it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, TCU Press, Thrift Books, Books A Million. It's available all over the world. And last Saturday, it was ranked #1 nationally in new books on sports journalism. So hope you
Awesome.
go out and get it and enjoy it. And it was a passion for me to write it. So, I appreciate you having me on the show to talk about it.
I'm so glad you were able to come on. You hear that? The #1 recently published journalism book currently out there, and all the links to where you can buy the book and all the links to all of Robert's incredible content is in the description below. Robert Steinfeld, we do appreciate you coming on. For the audience, I hope you guys did enjoy this episode alongside a 10-time Sports Emmy Award winning producer, Robert Steinfeld. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, and we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care. 3, 2, 1, we're off the air.